Good morning, everybody. I think that it is well time to begin. I have the pleasure of opening this conference on behalf of the GUE NGL of the European Parliament, which is the unitary left of the European Parliament and the Nordic left. I would like to introduce you to the International Forum for the Right to Health and Access to Treatment, organized by the Council Group of the Municipality of Milan. The three associations, the Parliamentary Group, the Municipal Group, we have invited many people to speak about the rights of citizens, especially of the more vulnerable citizens, to have a right to health. The member of the European Parliament, Stefania Torres, will be here this afternoon. In the meantime, we will have various work sessions. You have a program with the names and the presentations. And then we shall have some work groups around 1:30 p.m. I now give the floor to Brambilla on behalf of the Council Group of the Municipality of Milan. I would like to kindly ask you to remain in silence so that we can hear everybody. The importance of this conference is of great importance to everybody. Attacking health is something that is being perpetrated on behalf of a single concept, profit. Unfortunately, health is the victim of mercification, and this leads to a great number of errors. I give the floor to Basilio Rizzo, a member of the Executive Council of the Municipality of Milan. Good morning, every one of you, ladies and gentlemen. This is not the first time that here in Milan we have a conference organized by the GUE and our council here in Milan. I would like to recall the Conference of Migrants and also the conference regarding Expo in 2015, which dealt with subjects that were very closely to those we're dealing with here today. It was not something extemporary, but it was something that regarded a common commitment that we wish to undertake for the future of mankind. Today, the focus of our reflection will be health. In a few minutes, Vittorio Agnoletto, in his professional position, will start speaking about this subject. As far as I'm concerned, I would like to remember the similarities that there are in the previous conferences and today's. In the Expo conference, we were against the idea where everything in the name of food and water was totally dominated by what was rich, and how industries took these ideas and put them together in their Expo. I remember the white paper of Milan has actually disappeared from political reflection. The Milan Charter, it was called, and it renounced speaking about food and water for the poorer parts of the world, and the Caritas Internazionale, International Caritas, also at that time, which had been the strong arm of Papa Francesco, Pope Francis at that time, also disappeared. And today we also seem to see that there is this enormous gap in the field of health. There is very deep inequality, social inequality. There is climate change, which is often due to a criminal development model. The causes of mortality in very large parts of the population of Milan, of the world. Tomorrow and Monday, in a number of prestigious buildings not far from here, the representatives of the great of the world, of the G7, will be meeting to discuss health, and they will most probably proceed to privatizing the healthcare systems in most countries and speak of how they can make more money with pharmacological products. We're very distant from these people. I think that we should be proud to be able to represent the equalitarian, inalienable rights of mankind, which are the great majority of the inhabitants of the planet, and not the dominating ones. I followed the preparatory phases of this conference, and I would like to say that one of our focal issues of discussion was that there is not simply one. Medicine is not something that rotates around the wealthy and the powerful. It is something that is at the core of men and women who need that operations be made for their health. The citizens, for example, need to have knowledge, instruments, and so on, and so that they can make choices, and doctors at the same time should have the same knowledge and instruments in order to operate dutifully. I would like to thank everybody who is here today, but most especially the members of the medical profession for being here. We all know that our conferences are not only an opportunity of discussing knowledge. We would like that our conferences would lead to mobilization campaigns, movements that will help us reach and achieve our objectives. We will speak about the damage caused by pollution and the concrete systems for fighting against pollution. For example, privileging public transport, reducing emissions, and so on. We will look at what we can do in terms of prevention so that this can be extended to everybody. We can speak about damage to health caused by poverty. And we'll also see how we can organize ourselves to defend public health care against all forms of exploitation. We will speak about science and research so that these will not be subservient to the great multinationals. For example, here in Milan, the human technopole is something that we should fight against, something that they want to impose on us. And then coming to climate change, think of how we can fight the devastating effects, drought, famine, and which are the terrible things that strike the waves of migrants. And here, let me use a little bit of Milanese pride. The conference that we wanted to organize is typical for this city. Milan doesn't want to see a chloroformized type of city, a passive city, a city that does not raise its head faced with the czars of the earth who can do and undo things as they wish. I took the liberty of using the word czars of the earth because in November 2017 we must think of the value, the symbolic value of another 17 of November 100 years ago. Milan cannot reduce its race towards the future and have the EMA location here in Milan. and running after the masters of food, the masters of pharmacology, the masters of water. The local administration has found a great deal of sensitivity towards our conference. I would like to thank the GUE, the Committee for Health Without Masters and Without Borders. And we would like, of course, to thank the organizers, which have worked very hard, and it wasn't easy to organize. We would like this appointment, this conference here today, and I'm sure this will happen because the people who are here will make it important. Thank you to all of you, and I wish you the very best for your work. Thank you very much, Basilio Rizzo. And I would like to ask the people who are seated outside the hall to come in. It's a very beautiful space, but it's open on the sides. Introducing Vittorio Agnoletto creates some embarrassment in me. He is known by everyone, I believe. Rather than introducing him, I would like to thank him, and thank him very much indeed, because if we are here today and we were able to organize this very important conference, I think that most of the merit belongs to Vittorio. He tirelessly has worked in these months. And if I give the floor to Vittorio, and please remain silent, because otherwise the voice will not carry it to the end. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the GUE, the group of the European Green Left and the Nordic Left, and all of those who have worked as volunteers, as speakers or coordinators of the work sessions, and what they have given in terms of working hours and contribution for the outcome of this important day. Only 2 months ago, everything seemed impossible. As you know, tomorrow and Monday, the G7 on health will be held in Milan. And we discovered it by chance. Up to a few months ago, not even Palazzo Marino, our town hall, didn't know about this. All we knew was that the royal palace had been reserved for a sumptuous dinner, nothing else. And a couple of weeks ago, we knew the order of what was going to be discussed. The consequence of health due to climate change, the health of women and children, and the resistance to antibiotics. But until a few days ago, the news on the newspapers told us that there were some great men and women who were going to visit the city, and they would see the menu of their dinners, nothing else. It was going to be a kind of a clandestine meeting, something between socialites and nothing. But everybody knows that the newspapers need something to write on their pages. Yet the patients who are sick suffer, and they continue to get worse, and they would need some decisive and strong treatments, and nobody will go to save them. They will not be able to count on anything, and certainly not on the forces of these people. Yet the powerful, the great of the world, will divide 3 hours in discussing climate change, an hour and a half to think of the health of women and children, and a little less than an hour to speak about drugs. Then they will go to their dinner, they will take a picture, and they will go back home. These are the representatives of the same governments who very secretly since 2013 have been negotiating the TISA, Trade in Services Agreement, which is an exchange of services between these education and healthcare. In 2014, WikiLeaks, Julian Assange's organization, for the first time revealed the existence of these negotiations. The TISA, seems to be the biggest commercial agreement that has ever been discussed. Services will actually represent 70% of the world GDP. The 4th of February 2015, the Associated Whistleblowing Press, an agency formed by investigative journalists, published a document on the TISA where you can read that there is an enormous potential, a market of several hundreds of billions. But this market has not yet been exploited in full. And this is because, the document continues, it is due to the fact that the healthcare systems are financed and are provided by states or caretaking bodies of some kind. And so long as the situation remains like this, there will be no interest by foreign investors because of the absence of commercial finalities. The solution that has been proposed and put into practice is simple. Privatize everything, opening the powers to the big financial trusts and to the international companies, and so on, cancelling the role of the state, who should be responsible for the healthcare of its citizens. What can we do facing this ravaging situation of the planet? Well, faced with this situation, we've launched an appeal so that there could be meetings among the highest scientists, researchers, and activists who are committed in defending the health of people and healthcare in general, in order to save the planet, our lives, and those of the future generations. This appeal was accepted, was endorsed by men and women who have dedicated their lives to scientific research, committed every day to prestigious institutions, some of them which are in the forefront of medical research. They're here amongst us because they want to listen what is happening to their studies and how, unfortunately, there is a tragic awareness of today's situation. Some of them have actually paid attention to the powerful of the earth. They've run after them so as to be able to speak to them. Some have been received. Others have tried to present the results of their research, finding only lack of interest, sometimes derision, compassion. And some of them are here with us. The challenge that we are launching is to contribute to construct a long-lasting alliance between the scientific part of the scientific world and social movement. Because as our committee says, health can have neither masters nor borders. The WHO continues and says that health must be a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being, not simply the absence of a state of sickness. And for this too, and here I am turning to my countrymen, we have also our Constitution. Article 2 recites, "The Republic protects the health as a fundamental right of the individual and interest of the collectiveness, and it guarantees free treatments for the poor." And you must notice that this is the only article of the Constitution where we speak of the individual and not of the citizen. Health, for our constituent fathers, was a common good, was the good par excellence, and as such it must be protected. No one, therefore, must be deprived of the necessary treatments because of their economic situation. And again, Article 3 of the Constitution, after having stated the equality of all the citizens without distinction, recites, "It is the task of the Republic to remove obstacles of an economic and social order which are limiting, in fact, the freedom and the equality of citizens in the full development of the human person." This is the most innovative section of the Constitution and testifies to its greatness and why many have done everything they could to try and change it. Not only the theoretical principles of equality are stated there, but it actually entrusts to the state the task of removing all the obstacles that do not make these rights completely usable by the people. You can see a pyramid here, and you can see how 8.6% of population controls 85% of wealth, but especially where 70% of the citizens has available less than 3% of the wealth of the planet. This slide is not presented by a globalist, but by a Credit Suisse, which is an important Swiss bank. Situation worsens year after year. And when we speak about wealth and poverty, we're not only speaking about the northern and southern hemispheres. Look at this slide. Now, be careful. Lenzi and Carlton are first and last cities that are mentioned here, are two cities of Glasgow, less than 10 miles apart. Yet, between them, there's a difference in life expectation of about 30 years. 30 years, not 3 months. A person who lives in a poor neighborhood and those who live in a residential area. And we're in Scotland, not in a tiny village of Burundi, compared to a Canadian city. And this is what it means to evaluate certain determining factors of health. And that is how poverty, living conditions, work rather than unemployment impact on the quality and the duration of our life. In a recent conference, the researchers of the Mario Negri Institute have also shown how in the European Milan there are rich and poor neighborhoods with a very precise gradient regarding life expectation, although it is not as dramatic as the one that we've just seen. Very often, in medical conferences, we remember how in ancient China, the physicians were paid and awarded prizes for the number of citizens that became ill. I'm sorry, that was wrong. The less the citizens became ill, the more they improved. That was true prevention. And it became close to what we now would call medical science. Today, prevention has disappeared. It is the Cinderella of medicine. In Italy, the expense for prevention is lower than 5% of the total health care expenditure. But you see, prevention doesn't need drugs, big hospitals, sophisticated technologies. Prevention does not produce great profits. It doesn't open the doors to private interest. And so it's not of much interest to these people. And today, just to give you an example, today in Italy, 3,600 people are allowed to become infected by HIV, the AIDS virus, 10 every day. The prevention campaigns and information campaigns don't even appear anymore, neither in the streets nor in schools. Yet these persons become infected. And mind you, there are 10,000 euros an hour, a year per person for this prevention, 60,000 the men and women who could be saved with antiretroviral drugs. In the world, in 2016, 1,800,000 persons became infected with HIV.
We keep looking at Italy, but according to WHO data published in the World Malaria Report of 2016, there are around 212 million cases of malaria all over the world in 2015, and around 429,000 people died, including 70% of children under 5, including of which 992,000 in the African region. It takes very little to counter the spread of malaria and to treat these people. If we look at tobacco, for instance, tobacco is the first cause of death for non-infectious diseases. Yet the British American tobacco was one of the main investors, one of the main donors for Matteo Renzi's Open Foundation. So this speaks for itself. Now, let's take a look at drugs. Disease is a big source for profits. Big Pharma competes with industry, with the military industry, in terms of dividends that are paid out to shareholders. In the meantime, 11 million Italians had to give up treatment, and in the US, the poor people die 14 years earlier than rich ones. And HIV positive people around the world very often have no access to treatment, and this is also the case for people with hepatitis C. Big Pharma had no reaction to the 14 billion sanction that they received over 5 years, and therefore the deceitful advertisements and corruption, and this is because the amount of profits was much more than that, much more than sanctions. Research and production costs for sofosbuvir, the drug against hepatitis C, is only 10% of the price that the drug is sold. The logic is very simple. You need to wait for your disease to get worse in order to get treatment. Those out of the protocol either pay for the drug themselves, or they can go to Egypt and India, where the drug is 10, 20, 50 times less expensive. And Gilead bought the active ingredient from an American startup who could perform research thanks to public money. This is a case of private entities benefiting from public money. There are new cancer drugs on the horizon, costing up to 100,000 euro per medical treatment. What kind of state can afford these therapies? And who will monitor the efficiency and the true advantage of increasing, in terms of increasing survival? We call for the immediate implementation of clauses in TRIPS agreement, allowing for a country to guarantee and to produce drugs themselves without respecting patents. This is possible today. At the same time, we call for governments to discuss again the WTO negotiations, TRIPS agreements. It makes no sense to guarantee monopoly for production for 20 years when it takes just 1 year for companies to pay back for their research investment. But this is not enough. We need to state very clearly that we cannot allow the pharma industry to become a monopoly for in the private sector. And this is very important. It is very important to have a public pharma industry aiming at treating people and not only at profits. We have dealt so far with pathologies for which there is a treatment, but there is also there is even diseases, the so-called neglected diseases, forgotten diseases, for which there is no research because they affect poor people and they're out of the market. For many of these diseases, the treatments are there, but they are kept in the drawer because they're simply not profitable. So our human body, from the one hand, is neglected, tread over, is left to itself, but on the other side, it is a source for profit and a land of conquest all around the world. A couple of months ago, an agreement was announced whereby the Italian government will provide IBM with health data of the people living in Lombardy and then all over the country. So big, huge data banks that for healthcare, for health data, that together with, as it was the case for seeds, for instance. And I think that the time is not far away when parts of the human bodies will be privatized, as it has been the case with plants and seeds, which have been part of nature for centuries. So we stress that we are against these projects being developed outside any democratic control. We are against the Human Technopole project in Milan. They talk about a future based on customized medicine, but for whom? A future for whom, when the majority of human beings cannot access available treatments. We think that discussion on the location of EMA, as it is right now, is pointless because apart from it is more important to know why EMA is not carrying out independent research in order to assess drug efficacy or to analyze its side effects. And we want to know why they base their research on data provided by pharma companies. We want to know the guarantees about the absence of conflict of interest for people working for the public sector and for multinationals. And the case of flu epidemic H1N1 is very happened very recently, but governments are silent on EMA and on this. A couple of data on NHS expenditure. Western countries are cutting it, and the GDP share for a healthcare budget is decreasing continually, as it is the case, as you can see from the graphs here, that we didn't produce, but that the Italian National Industry Confederation provided. Now let's take a look at our country. Since the Mario Monti's government, public healthcare expenditure has been heavily cut. Greece and Portugal did worse than us. Between 2010 and 2014, according to the Court of Accounts, the national health system budget was cut by 14.5 billion, and further 10.5 billion will be cut between 2015 and 2018. Political marketing operations to acquire consensus are significant. Just to give an example, the Italian salary bonus that was given, that was paid out €80 for each worker, and tax reliefs, including the Jobs Act, meant that 10 billion euro were cut for the healthcare budget. So every year, the healthcare budget increases slightly, but this is only for making up for the increase in price in technology and services, around 2%. For instance, in 2015, it was announced that the national fund would be equal to 117 billion, whereas we're now at 118. And now this is happening again. The government has announced a new level, basic levels of assistance, healthcare, and announced that in 2018 the healthcare fund would be provided with 115 billion. But something different happens. The Stability Act cut 1 billion, and the Treasury Finance Minister, through a decree, cut further 604 million. And the Prime Minister Gentiloni, through the Budget Act, has also cut 2.7 billion for healthcare expenditure. So all in all, eventually we will only have 113 billion at disposal, and with such a budget it won't be possible to provide all essential services, and citizens will be forced to turn to private healthcare providers, and because all these cuts will mean that services will be cut. And it is projected that in Italy by 2020 healthcare expenditure will go further down to 6.3% as a ratio with GDP, below the threshold, the WHO threshold. Healthcare privatization is increasing every year in Italy as everywhere around the world. Only the rich ones will afford treatment. This is not a joke. On the other hand, it is not true that healthcare privatization leads to savings, but it simply transfers expenditure from state to citizens. Take a look at this graph. You see the huge per head healthcare expenditure in the United States. You see the two colors together represent the private expenditure. You see that the USA have a huge per head healthcare expenditure, largely paid by citizens themselves. And the following graph shows the percentage of healthcare expenditure as a ratio of GDP. Again, you can see to what extent private expenditure affects total expenditure. We all know about the situation in the US. A significant percentage of the population, despite the big per head expenditure, can access public treatment. Now, this privatization trend all over the world is can be seen also here in Italy. There's a push for privatizing facilities in a very subtle way, and this conceals a precise will to privatize. Long waiting lists are built on purpose. For instance, there's a lack of a single telephone number, and to make an appointment and visit, and so you see that this is made on purpose for increasing privatization. Since October, in our country, in our city, it's practically impossible to book a visit or an exam without going through very long waiting lists. And those who are institutionally responsible for this situation, the regional minister for health, recommend citizens to turn to a private companies to get treatment, or to get in order to overcome the waiting lists, to bypass the problem, and therefore they adopt an attitude. Very often, this leads to blackmailing and to intimidation towards physicians in their role for the national health system.
The privatization of healthcare, the appropriation of the human body as the source of profit, are going on at this speed with the privatization of common assets, which are needed for the survival of the human, of mankind in general and of other species, starting from water and the earth. The glyphosate recent case is really terrible because it has been built on the resources. It's overheating is destroying, for example, is destroying our planet. But according to the WHO, could reach 12.6 million dead between 2030 and 2050. 250,000 deaths extra every year for malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and 20,000 deaths for heat waves, and not only in Europe. There has been a class struggle in the last few years, and my class has won. This is what a satisfied Warren Buffett declared in 2016. He was indicated by Forbes as the third richest man in the world, and he is CEO of the Berkshire Hathaway, United States, holding, in absolute terms, one of the greatest multinationals in the world. But we believe that this is not the end of the match. History is not finished. For this reason, we felt that it was our moral duty, besides being social and political as well, to organize this forum tomorrow, to organize coordination between all the Italian realities, so that we can look at the new generations with dignity without having to lower our eyes, because we don't want to leave them with a worse world than what we have found. Ours is not a cry of despair. What we are launching is a signal of hope, of people who refuse to give in, of people who do not want to find refuge in individual solutions, of those who would like those who are born tomorrow, that they should in some way curse their existence. But we sincerely hope that they will be able to fall in love with life and with what surrounds them. We would like to thank Vittorio Agnoletto for this introductory presentation, and we now will start with our first session of the day, which is social inequality and poverty as a cause of disease. The coordinator of the session will be Dr. Pier Giorgio Duca. The speakers will be the oncologist Franco Cavalli and Matthew T. Roberts, who is coordinator of the Committee of Universities Allied for Essential Medicines and for People's Health Movement. Please come to the podium.